Hi, everyone. My name is Maura Keefe. I'm one of the scholars and residents here, and wow, the curtain warmers are on now, as they call them. Here we are. I am moderating this great conversation that we are about to have. This is Dante Palejo, the artistic director of the Limón Dance Company. And dancers will join us in a minute after they have, I don't know, a sip of water. So I want to start with the newest piece first. One of the things that, as Pam Taggi mentioned at her curtain remarks, is that you had already been in conversation with Olivier Tarpaga thinking about making a work for the Limón Company. And one of the things that's striking is the similarity in the personal narratives between Tarpaga and Limón. But what else about it? What else about his work or his movement material said to you, this is the right moment in time for this work to enter the company?
I had met Olivier a couple of years ago. I was at University of Florida, and he came and he was giving a presentation, and part of that presentation was telling his life story. And as I was listening to his story, it reminded me so much of Jose's. Mm-hmm. And then this happened, I got this role, and then we were talking about commissioned works. And I thought in order for me to really investigate who Jose Limón was, what his work meant to him, what it meant to his audience, I knew that I had to start at the beginning. I had to start at the very essential core of who Jose was, what he went through to get to where he went to, why he made the works he made. And so when I was looking and thinking about commissioned choreographers, I was like, well, who comes from that same cloth? Who has experienced similar things that is making work in this moment? So for me, it's this ride of understanding Jose at the very core and then working with artists who come from such a similar path that can also speak to what's happening in the world right now, so then their works can be in conversation with each other.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I was struck by, and we'll talk about the dancing more when the dancers join us, is the use of the projection design by Michael Clark. And I was thinking this wasn't something that was in practice, obviously, when Limón was making work, but his background as a visual artist, I was feeling like it added another layer of connection. Could you talk about that conversation, that if you were part of it, between Olivier and Michael Clark?
Yeah, I knew that I wanted to start incorporating more of this element inside of our work. So bringing back other Limón works, how we can continue to grow and see what else those works are capable of. So in that investigation, we were talking about projection design in some of the other Limón works. Mm-hmm. So part of the program, we had another piece with a projection design, and Olivier and I were talking. I was like, well, we're gonna have a projection. Is that something you'd be interested in? And he was like, oh yeah, that'd be amazing. So he started having these ideas, and then we just started talking about how that could deepen the world or transcend the space in a new way that could take his work also to another level that he hadn't yet really explored.
Mm-hmm. So I want to talk a little bit about, and good, I'm glad the dancers aren't here yet to ask the secret question about them. One of the things that I've been thinking about is a work from 1928, a work from 1967, a work from 71, 72, however we define it. Most of these dancers, maybe their parents were alive. And what are the ways that you and the rehearsal directors and coaches are talking to the dancers about, because it never was just about the movement for Limón. So what are some of the things that you are bringing into the conversation with the dancers about how to relate to something that Limón was thinking about 50 years ago?
Yeah, so when we're looking at a piece like Psalm, we're thinking about Jose was inspired by The Last of the Just, the André Schwartz-Barthes novel. And what that novel meant to him at the time, the evocation of the human spirit to transcend beyond death. Jose had made that work when he found out he had cancer, but before he told anyone. So what was that moment for him to create this work that he thought was going to be his last, everything he had, he poured into this work, which originally is almost an hour long and has so many sections and is a really big work, and we've brought it into what we see tonight. So in conversation with creating this work, hi Joey, hi everyone.
I'm going to pause you just for a second to introduce Frances Lorraine Sampson and Joey Columbus. I'm I'm going to let him finish his thing, and then I'm going to bring you two into the conversation. So it's an hour-long work that has been now distilled down to what we saw tonight.
So we're talking a little bit about this idea of how we make the work relevant for you guys, for the dancers now, as Jose would have done for his dancers then. I think it's a conversation. We're talking about the work, we're saying what these works mean, what they meant to him, and then we're talking to the dancers, how is this relevant for you now? What is this story for you now? Where in this story does this echo in your own life? And maybe they can talk a little bit about that and how that works for them. But when we restage all of the works, that's the conversation. Like, I know that I'm coming from it from a really specific place. Like, I see this work relevant because of my life experience and because of what I see happening in the world. But then when we're staging it with the company, what are you getting from this? How does this make sense for you? So I think it's that dialogue that keeps it engaging and fresh for everybody, and that they can continue to do that when they stage the work, a couple of years from now.
So let's start by talking with you two about Som. It is a stunning work, and I think it has this deceptively simple appearance at first. It's just some walks and some jumps and a little bit of weaving in and out, and then it gets increasingly complicated. So before we talk about the dancing of it, could you talk a little bit, Joey in particular, for you, do you feel like I'm trying to be Limon? How are you thinking about not just the action of the dance, but some of the expressivity of the dance?
I think the beautiful thing about Jose's work is that what makes it timeless is that it's applicable to everybody, no matter time, age, where on this earth you are in any point in history. There's just this deep connection to humanity. And I feel like for me, the way that I can access that is to dig deep into who I truly am. I have deep connections to this work as well. I was brought up in the Jewish faith, and so I think that brings me a step closer to being able to draw from something in my personal life and then bring that out on stage. I think what's being asked of me and what I'm asking of myself when I step into the role is coming from a place of very authentic emotions, whether that be desperation, whether that be agony, or just confusion on why this is happening. And I think all those things, to really feel them through the movement, I have to dig deep and think, how would myself, Joey, really experience these emotions? And then that has led me, a step further in the direction I want to go. I feel like every time I put that role into my body, I discover something new, and I feel like I keep walking in a direction that I want to go to, and it's like I see a goal of what I want, but it's an unattainable goal, and I think that that's what makes this journey so beautiful in that work, is that I know that I will continue forward. And there's many paths to take on that road, and exploring those paths is what keeps me excited and interested in the work.
So, Francis, I'm going to ask you for this sort of completely opposite version of this question, which is, oh my God, that movement, or the musicality and rhythm of that dance is so complex. When I was in here Wednesday afternoon when you were staging, we didn't hear the music, we heard counts of 7s and 5s and 15s. Could you talk a little bit about the complexity of the rhythmic structure, the groupings of dancers and some of that, and not so much about thinking about the expressivity of it, but the actual, how do we do this part of it?
So I had the great pleasure of growing up with the Limon work, the repertoire, as well as the technique itself. And the rhythms are complex because we are working with how we fall with gravity, and we are changing that speed with each step. So I actually think that the first walking section that we do is the hardest, because we are modulating our weight, one count, and then we're dividing that and continuously subdividing that to then slow down again. And I find that the more we move as a group, the easier it is to actually fall in those rhythms.
I think that's one of the things when I was thinking about this question of 1967 to today, is there something about the soloist and the ensemble that feels so important? And it feels like kind of a through line of some of these works. So, Francis, while you have the microphone, maybe you will say something about performing a work from 1928. And it's so unadorned. You have to just let lots of stuff go to be in it. Can you talk about what it has been like to be coached in Humphrey's work?
Yes. I actually started as one of the dancers in the pink dresses, and then I am now doing the blue role, who was...
So come back
Doris
tomorrow
Humphrey.
to see her in blue.
Tomorrow you'll see me in blue. Especially being in this space. Yesterday, as I was embodying the work, I was seeing the different spirits or people who have performed or lived in this space. I'm thinking about the different people within the company, but also in the greater arc of this, the different artists who have shaped this world, and how lucky I am to be part of that legacy, and to be part of this legacy company.
So Dante, last question before I open it up for some of the audience's questions or comments. Could you say something about assembling these works together and knowing the periods of time that we're moving through in modern dance's history?
This program in particular, I was interested in taking that historical arc. We're in such a historical place. So let's really start where Jose started, who he was inspired by. So that was an important aspect to make sure that we include the Doris Humphrey work. So as an audience member, you know who Jose was because you see who taught him the craft. So you see the craft and just the simplicity of Air for the G-string and just how Doris was able to shape space with nothing, just with walking and falling through space. And then we understand that as an audience, we're like, okay, well, this is where it started. He saw that, he was inspired by it, then he was able to create based on which she had discovered in her investigations. And then that continued investigation is how that got deeper towards the end of his life. And then even further, when he was making work that he didn't even know he was going to be making, because it was borrowed time for him. So he just kept making and making, and so many of his greatest works came at that last stretch of his life, because as Daniel Lewis says, movement was just pouring out of him. So I thought it was a really important arc for us to see that trajectory from what he was inspired by through his life, and then get to see where we are today with a contemporary choreographer.
Great, thank you. Let me open it up for your questions or comments. And we have this light that makes us look good, but I can't see you that clearly, so wave big if you have a question. His question is about how explicitly you're thinking about stories and narratives in these dances, that he can feel a sense of narrative arc in these works, but not deliberately character-driven, et cetera. And so are you in conversation with each other, thinking about a shared story, the story that Limon was investigating, the story of today, and how is that informing your dancing?
So I think one of the beautiful things about this work and this company is that we get to live in both places where sometimes I'm working with a very explicit narrative, whether that's been given to me or I have created that for myself. Other times, we're not working with an explicit narrative. In the Waldstein Sonata, that piece really was, again, Jose's kind of, adoration for Beethoven, and he wanted to do that. And I think it's as simple as that. While the work was being staged on us, I think to add an air of something, they were like, imagine you're at a tea party. And so I think that's as much narrative as we have, but I think that there's also narrative in the music. And so with that sonata, there is so much being told, and for me, that's how I create that narrative for myself. Whereas when I'm looking at Psalm, for me as the soloist, and I have 3 distinct solos, solo 1, 2, and 3 are going to be very different, and there's going to be an arc there for myself. Again, Psalm was based on a novel, The Last of the Just, and so there is an explicit narrative, but I do believe that the beautiful thing about Jose is he loved abstraction. And so whether or not he wanted that narrative to be so clear is kind of a mystery, which I think is why Dante mentioned that he wasn't so explicit. When we're working with other works, I think that there are clear narratives. If we're working with a work that's based on Greek mythology, let's say, that has a very different idea when I do that compared to Psalm, compared to the Waldstein Sonata. And so we kind of get to paint with all the colors of the wind.
So,
you know?
so Francis, maybe you can add in there and say something about if you're thinking storytelling when you're dancing, or if you're in a different kind of world without words.
Well, I would like to just say that the work is so sensation-based. So the movement speaks for itself, whether we're striving, whether we're yearning, whether we're in devastation. And I think when I take on these roles that are maybe more abstract, I allow myself to respond and be affected by what's happening in the world so that it is relevant to my life and in my experiences. And then also within the community of the dancers ourselves. Now, if we're doing something more narrative, we do examine the different gestures so that each one makes sense organically, like in the body, but also so that you understand what you are saying and that you have a relationship with your partner or the entire group. I think we're all listening to each other and seeing, and that's how we are able to move with breath and with rhythm, and sometimes even without music.
So this is a question about the Eugene Lester score for Psalm. We've talked about how it was based on a novel from 1959. We hear sung text. Is it important that we know what that is? And even if it's unimportant, how would we find out what is being sung?
Yeah, so this is the first time we've actually used this score in over 40 years.
Thank you for telling us.
In 2001, Carla Maxwell, the previous artistic director, had a new score commissioned because the score that we're currently using was partially lost. So as part of the reconstruction process, we brought back what we had, and then we stitched together from a variety of performances, a variety of recordings, the suite that we're currently performing, and then we had that transposed or transcribed, rewritten, and then re-recorded. So now we actually have this music in its entirety as it was originally intended. Through that process, we had a Hebrew scholar review the words, share that text with us, and he explained that it was several different psalms throughout that were combined into a variety of what you hear. And I thought it was important to really honor the original intention of what Jose was creating. So that was the big drive behind bringing this music back in this moment. And I wanted to stay true to Jose's original intention. I think in this early stage of my place of being a new director, I want to really land myself and saturate myself in what that original moment was in each of his works. And then after time, maybe I'll have more liberty to play. But at this moment, I want to stay as true as possible to what he was creating before I start to experiment. Right now, my experimentations will be with our commissioned choreographers.
So saying true to the work, I'm so delighted to see it back here at the Pillow. Thank you for being here, and thank you all for joining us.
Thank you so much.